The water cycle. The objective of this lesson is that scientists will comprehend the water cycle by taking notes on the stores and movement of water in the water cycle. Now, just a heads up, you're going to want to have at least 2 details for each step in the water cycle. To begin, let's talk about where water can be on Earth. We call the locations that water can be stores of water. The biggest store of water on Earth is the ocean. On the left here, you'll see the Pacific Ocean. You might notice that it looks like half the Earth is covered in the Pacific Ocean, and that's because it is. Oceans are enormous stores of water. Water can also exist in the atmosphere. We talked about how water can change state. It can be in water vapor or in water drops. The atmosphere also holds water. Water can also exist in the solid form. Here you'll see glaciers, and this is land ice on Antarctica. This is water that has been stored on land. Finally, you might see water in rivers or lakes, and this is what we call fresh water, or water without salt. This is not the same water as ocean water, because ocean water has salt and fresh water does not. Finally, water can be stored underground. Deep underneath you, yes, in the very ground that you're sitting on right now, underneath you, there is water mixed in the soil and sediment of the earth. That water sort of makes its way in, and that's what we call groundwater. If you've ever seen a well where somebody takes a bucket and pulls up a bucket of water, well, how'd they get that water? Well, it's in groundwater. There's literally water underneath your feet in the land. Okay, so we have water in different locations on Earth, but why does it move? Here's 2 really important cross-cutting concepts. The first one is that sunlight adds energy. Sunlight makes things hot. Think about standing outside in the middle of the summer underneath the sun. You start to feel really hot. That's because the sun is adding energy. The sun does the same thing to water. The next important concept is that gravity pulls things down. Now, I don't like the term pulling down, but for our purposes, that'll work. Gravity pulls things down or towards the earth. Another important thing is that water can change state as it adds and has energy removed. If you forget how water can go between solid, liquid, and water vapor, go ahead and refresh yourself with the video on states of water. All right, now here's where you're going to want to really make sure you have your notes. How does water move? There's 6 movements of water. Your job is to understand all 6 of them. The first one is evaporation. Again, evaporation. Evaporation is when liquid water is warmed by the sun. Again, heat from the sun is coming down and hitting this liquid water. The sunlight starts to add energy to the water, and you'll remember that when liquid water gains energy, it becomes water vapor. So this puddle of water gains energy until it becomes water vapor and goes into the atmosphere. It goes from a liquid to a gas. Next, we have transpiration. Transpiration is a process done by plants. In transpiration, plants absorb water through their roots. The water travels up their stems or trunks and is released by their leaves. So again, liquid water in the ground travels up a plant and is released as water vapor from the plant's leaves. Now, when you get into high school biology, you'll learn why this is, but for our purposes, just know that plants can release water vapor. Next is condensation. So we have water vapor rising into the atmosphere. Now, a really important thing to know is that the higher in the atmosphere you go, the colder the temperature is. If you've ever been on top of a mountain, you'll know that it is much, much colder on top of a mountain than at the very bottom of a mountain. Again, the higher you go in the atmosphere, or the higher you go in the sky, the colder it gets. As water vapor cools, so as water vapor goes up into the atmosphere, it starts to cool. It stops being water vapor and turns back into water, or especially water drops. And then those drops form clouds. In fact, next time you look at a cloud, I want you to think about the fact that that is water floating over your head. Another step in the water cycle is called precipitation. Precipitation is when water drops get large enough and heavy enough for gravity to pull them down. So again, a cloud is made out of water drops. As those drops get bigger and bigger and bigger, gravity starts to pull on them. Eventually, they get big enough that gravity will pull them to the ground. So any form of water falling from the sky, snow, sleet, freezing rain, rain, any form of water falling from the sky is called precipitation. The important thing to know here is that temperature determines what type of precipitation you get. Next we have runoff. So imagine it rains on the land. That rain hits the land, maybe this mountain or these fields, and then gravity pulls it downhill. As the water is moving across the land, downhill, that is called runoff. Now it's important to know that all water eventually ends up in the ocean. So it falls on the land, maybe it goes into a river, and then down into the ocean. Next, there's infiltration. Infiltration is when gravity pulls water underground. So sometimes it rains on the land and it runs off. Other times it rains on the land and the water slips in between the dirt and sand deep into the ground. Now you don't have like a swimming pool underground, but you do have water molecules in the soil. And because of gravity, those water molecules will still travel downhill underground towards an ocean. Finally, here's your key points. Water can change state as it gains and loses energy. Again, if you need a refresher, go back to the States of Water video. Water gains energy from sunlight, and water loses energy high in the atmosphere. These 2 points are incredibly important because these two are the reason why water can change states. Next, water moves between stores. Again, the stores are things like oceans, freshwater, groundwater. Water moves between stores as it changes states. So as water goes from a liquid to a gas and then back to a liquid, it's going to be moving. One of the big reasons that water moves between states is that gravity is pulling water down. And remember that as gravity pulls water down, that water will eventually find its way back into the oceans.